Hello everybody, welcome to this episode on statistics. In this video, we will be talking about surveys. We're going to be talking about all the steps needed to be fulfilled to conduct a survey. Let's start. So what are the steps? Step 1 is to clarify the purpose of the survey. Step 2 is to define the target population. Then you have to choose the type of the survey. Then you have to think about how you're going to formulate the questions. Then you have to select the sample. Then you have to carry out the actual survey. And then you have to organize and analyze the data. And finally, you're going to draw conclusions from the information that you got. Let's start with clarifying the purpose of the survey. How are you going to clarify the purpose of the survey? There's not much to say about this part, but try to answer these two questions. Why are you making the survey and what are you trying to get? Be as specific as possible. And when you actually do get the answers to these two questions, you actually have to tell your reason of why you're making the survey to the people who are participating in the survey, the people who are taking part in it. Okay, let's move on to step 2 of conducting a survey, and that is defining the target audience. Let's try to understand this with an example. This is the population of town X, and you are trying to find out the number of people who exercise in this town. So how do you actually collect the data? Do you go to the gym and ask everybody whether they exercise or not? Or do you just ask the people in the town itself? So in this case, you know what you're trying to find out. You know that you're trying to find out the number of people who exercise in this town, but you're not clear who your target audience is. Your target audience is not the people who exercise, but the people of town X. So you have to ask everybody in town X whether they exercise or not. And another thing to take note of is if you're conducting a telephone survey where timing is important and you're doing it live, then calling people at 6 o'clock. This is a 24-hour clock. If you're calling people at 6 o'clock, the results might not be accurate because that is usually the time when people go to exercise, and the people who exercise will be busy exercising and they cannot answer the call. So that'll cause bias. Which brings us to the next part, choosing the type of the survey. There are many different types of surveys, some being door-to-door survey or telephone surveys. These are not as relevant in 2023 as online survey or poll. But if you do decide to do one of these, where you're live with the participant, then timing is very crucial, like how we discussed in the last slide. But if you do decide to do online survey or poll, which is more relevant in 2023, there are many different ways to actually do it. It could be through an advertisement or on a website, but that's not important for us right now. Formulating the questions. This is a very important part. Now I'm going to read two different ways a single question can be formulated. This is the first way. Don't you agree that a tiny increase in sales tax is a worthwhile investment in improving the quality of the education of our children? This is the second way. It's the same question, but it's formulated differently. Don't you think we should stop asking for yet another increase in tax to fund the wasteful school system? Just by reading these questions, we can say that the first one is with the increase in tax, and the second one is against the increase in sales tax. So this can cause bias because in these questions, instead of actually asking for opinion and using it as information, they are basically pushing us to one side of the argument, which doesn't lead to accurate results. So whenever you're formulating the questions, always be as neutral as possible. Now I'm going to form the same question as neutral as possible. The school district is proposing a 0.01% increase in tax to provide funds for a new school. What is your opinion? Now this is much more neutral and it's actually asking for opinion. Another thing you have to take note of is that how many options there are going to be. For example, strongly in favor, neutral, against, or strongly against. One thing I would suggest you is to never have two options like yes or no, or with or against, because sometimes it's not as simple as yes or no. Some people are in the middle, some people are slightly more in favor, some people are really in favor. So always have 5 options like this if you're Of course, that depends on the question too, but try to have more than 2 options. Now let's get to selecting the sample. If for some reason, instead of conducting an online survey, you decide to collect a group of people and ask them for their opinion, then always remember, like I said a lot of times on this channel, to have as big of a sample as possible. That depends on your budget, of how big of a sample depends on your budget, and have the sample random, since both of these can lead to accurate results. Now let's get to actually carrying out a survey. Let's say that you ask a question to a participant and they give an answer that is bluntly false. For example, age 170. This is called the response bias because it's just bluntly false. One thing I will say is that you must take it into account. Otherwise, it is going to lead to bias. You have to take these into account, even though it bluntly seems like it's false. The only way you can avoid response bias is by by doing something while conducting the survey. And that, if you're doing it live, then you can do something while conducting the survey. But if you're not doing it live or doing an online poll in the internet where it's not live and people can just take part in it and go, then you have to think about how you formulate the questions. And if it can be misunderstood, you have to formulate with good wordings. If you're conducting a telephone survey, there's also a chance that some people might not take part. Some people might say that they do not want to take part. Then you have to consider that. You have to take that into account. And I'll give you a quick example right here. Let's say that you called 1,000 people, but only 200 people actually answered and are willing to answer the question. 100 of them said yes to a certain question. 100 of them said no. I know I said it's not good to have yes or no, but let's just say that we had a yes or no to simplify it a bit. Let's say 100% of 100 people said yes, 100 people said no from the 200 who answered. Then it's wrong to say that 50% said yes and 50% said no. That's wrong. What's right is 80% didn't take part, 10% said yes, and 10% said no. That's what you're actually supposed to write. Another thing that you just have to be careful of is when you're using formulas like standard deviations, standard error, like how we discussed in this channel before. The whole sample size is not actually the amount of people you ask, but the amount of people who answered. And those people are called the respondents. The number of people who answered are the ones that are supposed to be used in formulas. A big sample with low response rate is worse than a lot of questions asked to a smaller sample size. So instead of taking a big sample and only 100 of them answering, it's much better to have a small sample size and asking this small sample size a lot of questions. Now let's get on to the next part, interpreting the results. A common error that might occur when after you finish everything is that you're making projections to a larger population than a sample represents. Let's take a town X question. Let's say that we found the results as 50% of the people from town X actually exercise. That's a lot. That's a big percentage. But instead of saying 50% of people from town X exercise, you say that 50% of people from the whole country exercise. Now that's wrong because technically you didn't ask everybody from the whole country. You only asked from the people in town X. And that's it. This is the last point in the surveys topic. I hope you guys have learned something in this video. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to put it down in the comments below. If you like the video, consider leaving a like. If you want to watch more statistics videos like this, consider subscribing or check out my playlist on statistics. See you all in the next one.